She had spent 4 years and more money than most people earn in a lifetime, trying to get one answer out of a car that refused to give it. 4 years, 11 different shops, 3 specialists flown in from out of state, and every single one of them had handed her back the keys with some version of the same sentence: "We've done what we can." The 1969 Dodge Charger sat in the corner bay of a garage in Harlan, Kentucky, and it had not run since the winter her father died. Victoria Ashworth was not a woman who accepted "we've done what we can." She had built a regional logistics company from a single leased truck and 2 clients into a fleet operation covering 6 states. She had done it without investors, without a business degree, without anyone's permission. She was 44 years old, and she had learned early that "we've done what we can" was almost always a polite way of saying "we've stopped trying." But the Charger was different. The Charger had beaten her. Drop a comment with your city. Let's see how far this story travels. The car had belonged to her father, Ray Ashworth, who had been, depending on who you asked, either the best mechanic in Harlan County or the most stubborn man east of the Cumberland Gap. He ran a 2-bay shop off Route 119 for 31 years. He drove a 1987 Silverado with a cracked tailgate, and he wore the same brand of work boots his whole adult life, replacing them every 2 years whether they needed it or not, because he said a man who didn't take care of his feet didn't take care of anything. He smelled like WD-40 and Folgers coffee and, on holidays, like the Old Spice cologne that Victoria had been buying him every Christmas since she was 9 years old. He had bought the Charger the year she graduated college, not as a reward for her, though he'd framed it that way at the time. It was a reward for himself, she understood later. A thing he had wanted since 1971, when he was 17 and watched one roll through town and felt something rearrange itself inside him permanently. He paid $34,000 for it at an estate sale in Knoxville, which was, for Ray Ashworth, a genuinely shocking sum. He called her the evening he got back. "Tori," he said, and she could hear it before he said another word. A particular quality in his voice she'd heard maybe twice before. Something barely contained. "Dad, what did you do?" "I bought a car." She had laughed until she had to sit down. He drove it twice that she knew of. Both times in the parking lot of the county fairgrounds on a Sunday morning, slow loops with the windows down and his left arm resting on the door. The expression on his face one she would spend years trying to find language for. It was not happiness exactly. It was something older than happiness. The feeling of a thing long imagined finally being real. He died 14 months later. Heart attack, middle of a Tuesday, right there in the shop. The boots were on his feet. The coffee was still warm. Victoria drove from Nashville in 5 hours and spent 3 days in Harlan, doing the things that grief requires you to do whether you're ready or not. Paperwork and phone calls, and sitting in her father's house, surrounded by his objects, the worn recliner and the fishing tackle he hadn't used in a decade, and the Christmas mugs lined up in the cabinet like they were waiting for something. On the last morning, she went into the shop and sat on the floor beside the Charger for an hour and a half. Then she had it trailered to Nashville. The first shop took 3 weeks and called it an ignition module failure. They replaced it. The car still didn't start. The second shop disagreed with the first. They said it was a fuel delivery issue. They replaced parts. The car still didn't start. By the time Victoria had cycled through 11 different mechanics over 4 years, the total cost had passed $60,000, and not a single person had been able to tell her why the car refused to turn over. The engine was sound. Every diagnostic came back clean. Something was wrong somewhere that the standard tools weren't finding, and every shop she brought it to eventually reached the same wall and quietly handed her back to it. She had the car in a climate-controlled storage unit in East Nashville. She visited it the way you visit something you don't know how to help. She would stand beside it with her hand flat on the hood and feel the particular silence of something that should be alive and isn't. And she would stay until the feeling became too much to stand, and then she would leave and not come back for a few weeks. By year 4, she had mostly stopped going. The town of Millhaven, Tennessee sits about 40 minutes southeast of Nashville, in the kind of geography that people from cities describe as quaint, and people who grew up there describe as home with a complicated expression. It has a hardware store that's been in the same family for 3 generations, a diner that opens at 5 in the morning and closes at 2 in the afternoon, and a small automotive garage on the east end of Buckner Road with a hand-painted sign that says Cole Auto, Surface and Repair. And, below that in smaller letters, by appointment preferred, but walk-ins welcome if we're not slammed. The garage had been there for 6 years. Before that, the building had been a feed store. The owner had done most of the renovation himself, which you could tell if you looked closely, not because it was poorly done, but because it had the particular quality of work done by someone who had time to think about each decision and made choices accordingly. The floors were clean, the lighting was good. The tool organization was almost austere. The owner's name was Daniel Foss. He was 38 years old, medium height, with the build of someone who used their body for actual work, and the kind of face that was hard to read at a distance, not unfriendly, just contained. He had dark hair that he kept short, and hands that were perpetually stained at the knuckles, no matter how thoroughly he scrubbed them, the specific occupational mark of a man who spent his days in engine bays. He drove a 2003 Ram 1500 with 210,000 miles on it and a child's drawing of a dog taped to the dashboard, slightly faded, that he never moved. His daughter's name was June. She was 7, small for her age, with her father's dark eyes and her mother's stubborn way of standing when she was making a point, which was often. She came to the garage on weekday afternoons when school let out, because Daniel's hours were long, and the after-school program at Millhaven Elementary ended at 4, and the garage didn't close until 6. She had a designated spot in the corner of the first bay, a folding table her father had set up, with a second-hand chair and a clip-on lamp where she did homework and read, and, when neither of those held her attention, watched her father work with the serious focused interest of someone taking notes on a craft. June had opinions about cars. Specific, detailed opinions, which she had formed by listening to her father and reading books she found at the library, and occasionally asking mechanics, who came into the shop questions that made them pause before answering. She was not the kind of child who performed interest for adult approval. Her interest was real, and it was quiet, and it was total. The day Victoria Ashworth drove to Millhaven, she almost didn't. She had found Cole Auto the way people find things when they're running out of options. Someone mentioned it offhand. A colleague whose brother had brought a difficult vintage restoration project to Daniel Foss and come away genuinely impressed. The colleague had said, "The guy's not flashy, but he knows things the dealership guys don't." Victoria had written the name down on a post-it note and stuck it to her monitor and looked at it for 3 weeks before calling. She made the appointment for a Tuesday in September. She pulled into the gravel lot at 2 in the afternoon, with the Charger on a trailer behind her truck. Daniel came out from the first bay wiping his hands on a shop rag, looked at the trailer, looked at her, and said, "You must be Ms. Ashworth." "Victoria," she said. He nodded. "Tell me about it," she told him. 4 years, 11 shops, the clean diagnostics, the replaced parts that made no difference, the original problem that no one had been able to locate. She told it efficiently, the way she told things, without editorializing, just the facts in order. He listened without interrupting, which she noted because most people interrupted. When she finished, he walked around the trailer once, looking at the car through the tie-downs, without touching it. "When's the last time anyone looked at the electrical system as a whole?" he said. "Not individual components. The whole architecture." She thought about it. "I don't think anyone has." He was quiet for a moment. "Okay," he said. "I'll need a few days." He said it the way someone says a thing they mean simply without performance. Not "I'll see what I can do," and not "I'll try my best." Just a few days. Like the problem was already partially solved in his head, and the remaining work was just time. She left the car and drove back to Nashville and told herself not to think about it. She thought about it constantly. 3 days later, she called to check in. Daniel answered on the second ring and said he'd found something, and he wanted to confirm it before saying more because he didn't like telling people things he wasn't sure of. She said fine. He said he'd call her tomorrow. He called the next morning at 8 o'clock. The car was modified, he said, sometime in the 70s, before your father owned it. Somebody added an aftermarket security system and integrated it into the factory wiring. The integration point has a ground path that was rerouted as part of the modification. Over 50-some years, the insulation degraded. Not enough to show as a clean fault on standard diagnostics. Just enough to create an intermittent resistance spike under specific conditions. When the engine bay warms past a certain threshold during start sequences, the resistance confuses the ignition management, and it shuts down before completing. There was a silence on Victoria's end that lasted long enough that Daniel said, "Ms. Ashworth?" "How?" she said. "How did you find it?" "I wasn't looking for a broken part," he said. "I was looking at how everything connected. When you do that, the pattern shows." She was quiet again. "The repair itself isn't complicated," he said. "Reroute the ground path, replace the degraded section, remove the redundant components from the aftermarket system. The car will run clean after that. Everything it has will be what it's supposed to have." "How long have the other shops been working from each other's reports?" she asked. "I don't know. But most of them were probably looking in places the previous shops had already looked." She understood what that meant. By the time a problem had passed through enough hands, everybody was looking at the map instead of the territory. "How long to do the repair?" she said. "Already done," he said. "I wanted to confirm the diagnosis before I called. I ran it this morning." She drove back to Millhaven in 40 minutes. She was going faster than she should have been. She knew it and didn't change it. The garage was open when she pulled in. One of the bay doors was up, and she could hear the radio from inside, something country and low. She parked and got out and walked in through the open bay door and stopped. The Charger was idling. Not starting, not turning over. Idling, running, alive, producing the specific low rolling sound of an engine that had been waiting 4 years for someone to listen to it correctly. The sound was physical. It came up through the concrete floor and into her feet and kept going. Daniel was standing to the left of the car with his arms crossed, watching the engine with an expression she didn't have an immediate word for. Not pride exactly, something more like the look of a person who had put a dislocated joint back into place. The satisfaction of a thing being correctly ordered again. In the corner, at the folding table, a small dark-haired girl was watching over the top of a paperback. She had both hands wrapped around the book, and her eyes were very large. Victoria stood in the bay door, and the sound of the engine moved around her, and she did not move, and she did not say anything for a long moment because she could not. Something had broken open in her chest, not painfully, more the way a window breaks open in a house that has been shut too long. A sudden change in pressure, air moving where air hadn't moved. She covered her mouth with one hand. The girl in the corner quietly said, "Are you okay?" Victoria looked at her. She nodded. She was not entirely sure it was accurate, but she nodded. Daniel didn't say anything. He didn't say it's all right, and he didn't say, "Are you okay?" And he didn't perform the discomfort that most people perform when they witness someone else's unplanned emotion. He stood where he was and let it be what it was. The engine ran between them. After a while, Victoria sat down on the floor with her back against the workbench and her knees up. The crying had stopped by then, mostly. The leftover kind, just a residue of it, the eyes still doing what eyes do after. Daniel sat on an overturned bucket a few feet away. Not close, not far. He put his forearms on his knees and looked at the running engine and didn't try to fill the air with anything. The girl in the corner had gone back to her book. With the specific tact, Victoria would think later, of a child who has learned that adults sometimes need space without being told. "I'm sorry," Victoria said eventually. She gestured vaguely at her own face. "That was not what I intended to do." "You're in a garage," Daniel said. "There's no protocol." She looked at him. He was still watching the engine. He had a quality of stillness that was not the stillness of someone holding themselves back, but the stillness of someone who was simply present. She had spent 4 years bringing this car to people and had never once felt that any of them understood what the car was actually about. She wasn't sure she'd said it out loud. She wasn't sure she'd needed to. "He drove it twice," she said. "My father. The whole time he owned it, he was too afraid of scratching it. He loved it. He was terrified of it," she said. "He treated it like it was made of something breakable. Some things are worth that kind of care." She looked at her hands. "He meant me. I didn't understand that for a long time. He said once that the car fit him like something made for him specifically. I think what he meant was that buying it felt like finally doing something just for himself after 30 years of doing things for other people. Mostly for me." Daniel was quiet. "He died in his shop," she said, "working, which I think he would have considered a reasonable way to go. He was that kind of man." From the corner, very small, the girl's voice. "My mom died when I was born." Both adults went still. The girl was still looking at her book. She said it the way she might say any other fact, not performing grief, not looking for a response, just offering a true thing in the way that children sometimes do when the territory feels right. Dad says she was really funny, like actually funny, not just nice funny. He says I laugh like her. Victoria looked at Daniel. He was looking at his daughter with an expression that was too many things at once to name cleanly. He said, "You do laugh like her, I know," June said. She turned a page. Victoria looked at the floor for a moment. Then she said to Daniel, "How long ago?" 8 years, he said. June was a few hours old. He said it the same way he said everything. Plain and direct, without a wrapper around it. It was a complication during delivery. I found out in the parking garage when I came back to get things she'd asked for. He paused. I sat in the car for a while. Then I went back in. "I'm sorry," Victoria said. "So am I." He picked up a shop rag from the floor and turned it over in his hands. Her name was Rosalind. She'd have hated that I call her Roz in my head. She didn't like the nickname, but it's what I call her anyway. I figure she can be annoyed about it from wherever she is. Something shifted in Victoria's chest. The particular movement of recognizing something in another person that lives in the same room as your own loss. Not identical rooms, but adjacent ones. The shared geography of having been reorganized by something you didn't choose. "My father's name was Ray," she said. "He said my name wrong on purpose my whole childhood. He called me Tori instead of Victoria because he thought it was funny that it bothered me." She looked at the car. "When he stopped doing it, after I told him I'd grown out of caring, I missed it immediately. I didn't tell him that." "People don't," Daniel said. "Usually." The Charger idled between them, patient and steady, in no hurry. "From the corner, can I ask a question?" Victoria looked at June. "Sure. Is the car from the 60s? 69. June nodded with the seriousness of someone filing information. The body style changed after that. "I like the pre-70 design better. The rear haunches are more intentional." She looked up briefly. "Dad taught me that word for cars. Intentional. Some designs look intentional and some look like they ran out of time." Daniel made a sound that might have been a stifled laugh. "She's right," he said. "I know I'm right," June said, and went back to her book. Victoria stayed another hour. She hadn't planned to. She had a call at 4, and emails that had been waiting since morning, and a dozen things that required her attention, and she stayed another hour anyway. Sitting on the floor of a garage in a town she'd driven to on a desperate long shot, listening to her father's car breathe. She left when Daniel suggested quietly that she might want to actually drive it before the day was done. She looked at him. "I haven't driven it, I know. I don't know if I'm ready." He didn't tell her she was. He didn't push it. He said, "It'll be here," and let that be the whole sentence. She drove back to Nashville. That evening she sat on her back porch with a glass of wine she forgot to drink and thought about a man named Daniel Foss, who had found in 2 days what 11 shops couldn't find in 4 years, and whose daughter had said, "I like the pre-70 design better with the quiet certainty of someone who had formed the opinion honestly and saw no reason to hedge it." She went back on Friday, not for the car. The car was fine. She told herself she went back because she had questions about the long-term maintenance, which was true, but it was not the whole truth. The whole truth was harder to say out loud, and she wasn't sure she was ready to say it yet, even to herself. June was at the folding table when she arrived, working on what appeared to be a math worksheet with the expression of someone who finds the subject mildly beneath them but understands the social contract of school. "You came back," June said. "I had questions." "About the car?" "Partly." June looked at her for a moment with the direct, non-calculating appraisal of a 7-year-old who hasn't yet learned to soften her observations. "You seemed sad on Tuesday. Are you less sad now?" Victoria thought about it honestly. "A little," she said. June nodded. "Dad says grief doesn't go away. It just gets more room." She went back to her worksheet. "I'm not sure I totally understand what that means, but I think it's right." Daniel appeared from the second bay, wiping his hands. He looked at Victoria with an expression that didn't perform surprise and didn't perform welcome. He just looked at her, the reading expression. She was already starting to recognize it. Taking stock without commentary. "Miss Ashworth," he said. "Victoria," she said again. Something shifted in his face. "Small, Victoria," he said. She asked her questions about maintenance, and they were real questions, and he gave her real answers. She asked about storage conditions and oil intervals, and the specific quirks of the modified electrical system now that it had been correctly repaired. He answered with the same plainness he brought to everything. No overselling, no performance of expertise. Just information, accurate and useful. At some point, the questions ran out, and neither of them immediately moved. "How did you end up in Millhaven?" she said. He leaned against the workbench. "Rosalind grew up here. We were in Detroit before. I was working for a supplier to the OEMs, integration systems. When she died, I didn't want to be in Detroit anymore. Her family was here, and June needed people around her who had known her mother." He crossed his arms. "The work exists anywhere. People always need cars fixed." "You went from OEM integration systems to a two-bay shop in Millhaven." "I went from OEM integration systems to being someone's father," he said. It was not defensive. It was simply the correction of a misunderstanding. "The shop came later. I needed something to do with my hands that wasn't the kind of work that required me to be unreachable 3 weeks at a time." Victoria looked at the shop, the particular care of it, the deliberate organization, the good lighting, the floors. "You built this place. Most of it. It shows." He looked at her. "Is that a compliment?" "It is." He didn't deflect it or minimize it. He just said thank you and meant it. June's voice came from the corner. "He built my table too. And the lamp, June. It's relevant. It shows he's good at building things." She did not look up from her worksheet, "And he made the shelves in my room. And he fixed the neighbor's truck for free because her husband was in the hospital." A pause. "He doesn't know I know that last one." "I know you know," Daniel said. "I figured," June said. Victoria laughed. It surprised her. It arrived without warning from somewhere under the weight of the past 4 years. And it was completely genuine, and it felt, she would think later, like the sound of something letting go of something else. Daniel looked at her when she laughed. Just looked, for a moment. Then he looked somewhere else. She drove the Charger for the first time on a Sunday in October. Daniel drove out to Nashville to follow her in her truck, which she hadn't asked him to do, and which he offered in the specific way that he offered things. As a practical fact rather than a favor. "If something goes wrong mechanically, you'll want someone there who knows the car," he said. She didn't argue. She started the engine in the parking lot of a park near her house and sat with it running for a while before she put it in gear. The sound was different from inside, more intimate. She could feel it in the seat and the wheel and the floor. She drove it out of the parking lot and onto the street and then onto the long 2-lane road that ran north along the river, and she started to understand what her father had felt in that parking lot at the fairgrounds. Not just the car, the idea of it, the thing you carry in your imagination for years before you're allowed to have it. Daniel followed at a distance that was respectful without being distant. After about 5 miles, she pulled over. He pulled up behind her and got out and came to the window. "How is it?" he said. "He never got to do this," she said, properly. "Open road. I know. He was too careful." She looked at her hands on the wheel. He spent his whole life being careful with things he loved. He thought careful meant keeping them safe. "He wasn't wrong," Daniel said. "He just maybe didn't know what safe meant for a car like this." She looked at him. "A car like this wants to run," he said. "That's what it's for. Keeping it perfect in a parking lot is one kind of care. Using it the way it was made to be used is another kind." He looked at the road ahead of them. "I think your dad would have figured that out if he'd had more time." She put the car back in gear. "Come on," she said. "Keep up." She drove it. She actually drove it. The way the car had been built to be driven, properly, and with her whole attention, and the engine opened up into the October air, and the river moved on one side, and the fields moved on the other. And she thought about Ray Ashworth, who drove slow loops in an empty parking lot because he was afraid to damage something he loved, and who had never once damaged her, who had given her his whole unguarded heart from the day she was born and never asked for it back. "I'm driving it, Dad," she thought. "I'm driving it like you should have." By December, the trips to Millhaven had stopped being about the car. She didn't say this out loud for a while. Neither did Daniel. They had the particular mutual understanding of two people who are both observant and both slightly cautious about naming things before they're sure what the names are. But Victoria would come by on Saturdays, sometimes with a reason, and sometimes without one. And June had developed a standing habit of asking her opinion on books and reporting on the soccer league she'd joined in October, which she played, according to her father, with an intensity that was clarifying to watch. "She's not always accurate," Daniel said, "but she's always committed." "That's the more useful trait," Victoria said. "That's what I tell her." "Does she believe you?" "She believes everything I tell her. It's starting to feel like a responsibility." June, from across the kitchen, without looking up, I believe you when you're right. That's different. Daniel looked at Victoria. She's going to be terrifying, Victoria said. She already is. There was an afternoon in January, cold and bright, when Victoria arrived and found the shop closed, which was unusual. A handwritten note on the door said, "Back at 3, Foss." She called Daniel's cell and he picked up on the second ring from the sound of it in some outdoor location. "I'm sorry," he said. "June had something at school. It ran long. Don't apologize. I should have called ahead. You're always welcome to come without calling ahead." She stood in the parking lot in the cold for a moment. "That's a thing you just said. I know it is." A silence that had weight in it. "I'll be back by 3, he said, "if you want to wait." "I'll wait," she said. She sat in her truck and watched the bare trees move at the edge of the property and thought about what it meant that she was sitting in a parking lot in Millhaven, Tennessee in January, waiting, and that this was the part of her week she looked forward to most. At 3:15, Daniel's truck came up Buckner Road and pulled into the lot. June was in the passenger seat with something in her arms, a poster board that appeared to be some kind of science project. She got out with it carefully, holding it flat, and walked toward the shop with the concentration of someone transporting something fragile. She passed Victoria's truck without looking up. "Hi, Victoria," she said. "Hi, June. I presented the solar system today. I included Pluto. Mrs. Keller said Pluto isn't a planet. I said it's a dwarf planet and that the distinction is somewhat political." She reached the door. She gave me full marks anyway. Victoria looked at Daniel. He shrugged. "She's not wrong about Pluto." "Noted," Victoria said. They went inside. Daniel made coffee. June set up her project at her folding table and worked on adding a small annotation she said the presentation hadn't had time for. The shop was warm, and the winter light came through the bay windows and lay in long bars across the floor. Victoria sat on a stool at the workbench. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure," Daniel said. He handed her a mug. "The woman at the parts supply in town. Sandra. She said she's known you since you moved here. She said when you first arrived you barely talked to anyone. That's accurate. She said June is the one who got you back." She wrapped both hands around the mug. She said June started talking to everyone at the hardware store and the diner and the school, and eventually people just followed the kid to find the father. Daniel looked at his coffee. "Also accurate. June pulled you into the world." "June pulled me into this world," he said. "The specific one she needed, which turned out to be the one I needed too." Victoria looked at her mug. There were things she could say. She was aware of the catalog of them, the careful ones and the less careful ones. She said the one that was true. "I was alone for a long time," she said. "By choice, mostly. I built the company and I told myself the company was enough. For a long time I believed it." She looked at him. "My father was the only person who I didn't have to perform competence for, and after he died, I think I just went further in." She paused. "The car was the last thing I was holding from him. I wasn't ready to give up on it." "You didn't give up on it," he said. "I almost did. Almost doesn't count." From the corner, very quietly without looking up. "It definitely doesn't count. Almost is not a category." Victoria looked at June. June turned a page in her reference book. "She's listening to everything," Victoria said. "Always," Daniel said. "Don't let the book fool you." "I'm building context," June said. "It's important." The coffee was good. The shop was warm. The Charger sat in the first bay, visible through the interior window, quiet and present, not going anywhere. "Your father would have liked this place," Daniel said. She looked at the car. "He would have asked you 100 questions, and then disagreed with half your answers, and then come around to your way by the end of the day. That's a good kind of person." "He was," she said. "He really was." June appeared at her father's elbow, having concluded her annotation project without announcing it. She looked at Victoria with the frank, assessing gaze that Victoria had come to recognize as June's baseline expression. "Are you going to keep coming here?" June said. "June," Daniel said. "It's a real question. I'm not being rude. I'm doing future planning." Victoria looked at her. "What does future planning require?" "Knowing if we need to get a better chair for you," June said. "That stool is fine for short visits, but it's not comfortable for regular ones. Dad has a good chair in the back. He doesn't use it because he's never sitting down. We could move it." Victoria looked at Daniel. He was looking at the ceiling in the particular way people look at the ceiling when they're deciding not to intervene. "Yeah," Victoria said. "I'm going to keep coming here." June nodded. "I'll move the chair," she said, as if this settled the matter completely, because in her view it did. She went to get it. Daniel and Victoria stood in the shop in the afternoon light and the warmth of it, and didn't say the obvious thing because it didn't need to be said yet. The chair arrived. It was a good chair. The charger sat in its bay, and the shop sat in its town. And the town sat in the particular geography of a life that had arranged itself, slowly and improbably, and through the specific machinery of grief and stubbornness. And one September afternoon, when a woman drove an hour on a long shot, around a kind of rightness that didn't announce itself. It never does. That's the thing about the doors that matter most. You don't plan them. You come to the end of every other option, and you push on one more, not because you're sure, but because you're not done yet. And sometimes what's on the other side has been there the whole time, patient, real, waiting for someone to stop looking past it and actually look. The chair was good. Victoria moved it 6 inches to the right, toward the window, where the light was better. June approved. Daniel made more coffee. Outside, the January afternoon went about its business, cold and indifferent and briefly beautiful. The way January afternoons in Tennessee sometimes are when you're not expecting it. The charger would run a long time. She'd make sure of it now.